Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Pastor Amish McGregor sat uncomfortably at the desk in his office. He had done these counselling sessions hundreds of times over before, but this was so different. What did he even say to Claudia Hannon? What words of comfort could he possibly offer her, to reassure her that God was good, and that yes, she would overcome this adversity in time? For what she was going through was known as the dark night of the soul, and things were sure to get better with the passing of time. Pastor Amish struggled as he wrestled with the words on his tongue that seemed to refuse to come out, for words needed to be chosen with judicious, careful caution, for they had the potential to be as sharp and as cutting as daggers, for words, as benign as they may seem on the surface, are capable of inflicting much damage. Pastor Amish was very aware of their power to break down and destroy, and to build up, restore and heal, which was why the Bible always talked about the power of the spoken word. Claudia Hannon was in a very vulnerable, unenviable place in her life at the moment, and so every word he uttered, he weighed out very sensitively in his mind before it was spoken audibly, for he was afraid that anything he might say would make things a whole lot worse for Claudia. In that moment, when his office was filled with an uneasy tension, he prayed a silent prayer in his heart to God. "Help me, Lord. Help Claudia. Please don't let her blame you for what has happened to her husband and son. Help her to see that everything, and in everything, there is a divine purpose, and that not all is lost. Help her, Father God, fully appreciate that there still is hope in her hopelessness, and that you really have a divine plan for her life, even though for her it may be impossible to see right now. We all know, Lord, that in everything there is perfect order, and out of chaos you can bring breakthrough, so that your glory will shine through, even in the darkest hours of our lives." And as he prayed this silent prayer in his head, he suddenly thought of his beautiful wife Felicia, along with his two grown-up sons, Antonio and Marcus, and he couldn't imagine what life would be like without them. How could he possibly know or fully appreciate and even comprehend what Claudia Hannon was going through right now? He couldn't envisage, and didn't want to either. If the boot were on the other foot, even as a man of God, he really didn't know how he would cope if his family was suddenly deleted from his life, and he wondered whether his relationship with God would stand up to the wear and tear of losing so much. For it's so easy to blame God when things go badly wrong, and as a pastor, with many years' experience behind his belt, he had seen it time and time again in his counselling sessions, people losing their faith because they felt as if God had abandoned them in their time of trouble. And doubtlessly Claudia Hannon, who was a devout Christian, was feeling the very same way about their dear Lord and Saviour. Claudia Hannon, in the space of 2 weeks, had lost everything, absolutely everything. And for her it seemed all hope was lost. And it probably was. How did he ever begin to counsel someone in her precariously fragile position? What could he possibly say to make things any better for the woman? so that this woman, inflicted with so much grief, could actually walk away from his offices with a smile on her face. Of course he knew that was never, ever going to happen, for Claudia looked so sorry, as sorry and as sad as some tangled seaweed lying washed up on the seashore. Pastor Amish glanced briefly at his parishioner. Claudia was sitting rather awkwardly in the comfortable sofa chair on the opposite side of his desk, which was used for the purposes of his counselling sessions. She appeared so tiny and fragile, as if even the sofa chair had swallowed her up whole. She looked diminished, as if the bright light inside her, that at one time had been so vibrant, had now become quite dim, losing its cheerful glow. The woman had definitely lost a significant amount of weight. She'd always been on the slender side to begin with, but now she looked emaciated. Her clothes were hanging on her, as if she was a little girl playing dress-up and trying on her mother's clothes. Indeed, her clothes almost looked ridiculous on her, they were so big. There was dark half-moon crescents framing the undercarriage of both her eyes, and her sorry-looking face was sunken and forlorn, as if it had lost a great deal of volume in the cheek area. Claudia seemed to be sitting in the chair, as if she wasn't entirely present in the room, as if a large part of her was 100 miles away, lost in her own little bubble. Pastor Amish noticed her blue-grey eyes seemed focused on his happy family photograph that was propped up on his desk in a rather smart-looking wooden frame, where in the photograph a rather full-faced Pastor Amish is standing next to his plump but jolly wife, along with their 2 grown-up children, who are all smiles for the camera. How Pastor Amish wished Claudia wouldn't keep staring at the photograph. It made him shift rather uncomfortably in his seat. The photograph was a haunting reminder to Claudia Hannon of what she'd lost. It made him feel all the more uncomfortable. He wanted to quickly snatch the picture away and thrust it in his drawer, for he felt so badly that he had life so very good. He almost felt as if he needed to apologize to Claudia Hannon for the smoother course his life had taken, compared to the rocky, tumultuous journey that had been her life to date. He had seen it all too often, some of his parishioners getting a larger helping of tragedy in their lives that they certainly did not deserve. Where was the fairness of it all? Perhaps he shouldn't have happy family photographs displayed on his desk, especially during counselling sessions, for maybe it made his parishioners feel all the more miserable, and was a staunch reminder that his life looked a lot rosier than theirs did. "No one needs that thrust in their face," he thought. "I shouldn't be displaying my happy photographs around and about the place. It's insensitive of me. It's like rubbing salt into the wound for my parishioners." Claudia Hannon had been faithfully attending St. Catherine's Church since she was a little girl. She'd come to the services with both of her parents, who had been devout in their faith. Her parents had adopted her from a children's home when she was 4 years old, as she'd been removed by social services from her biological mother's charge after her mother had been found dead from a drug overdose. The Hannons had adopted her as their own. Claudia's late adopted mother was sadly unable to have children of her own, so when Claudia came into her life, she gave God all the glory, for she had been blessed with a daughter, and even though Claudia had not been her biological child, as far as Mrs. Hannon was concerned, she most certainly was. When Claudia was in her early 20s, both of her adopted parents were tragically killed in a freak accident when a rogue wave had swept her mother out to sea. Her father had courageously tried to rescue his wife, but to no avail, as the tempestuous current was wildly frantic that day, so the couple didn't even stand a fighting chance. The Hannons had been on holiday at the coast at the time, and a couple of days later both of their bodies were found washed up on a local beach, and were discovered by an early morning jogger. Claudia had inherited her family home from her adopted parents, who had left her their property in their will. She had refused to sell, for in her eyes the house had left so many indelible precious memories behind of her childhood and the happy years she had spent with her beloved parents. So parting with the house meant for her she'd be giving up the only thing she had left of her parents, and she simply could not do that. When Claudia had married her husband Wes, he had kindly agreed to adopt the Hannons' surname, as it meant so much to Claudia. And he had also moved into the family home. A year later, Claudia had given birth to a beautiful baby boy, who had grown up to be a handsome 22-year-old man, whom Claudia had named Jack. From the moment Jack was born, it was clear he was the splitting image of his father. The couple had enjoyed at least 20 good years of raising Jack, and those had been very good times indeed. But tragically, Claudia's husband Wes had developed pancreatic cancer 3 years earlier, and 3 weeks ago had sadly passed away from his long, insufferable illness. Claudia and her son Jack had been grief-stricken over his passing, and the funeral for her husband had been conducted at St. Catherine's Church by Pastor Amish himself, who had done a wonderful service to commemorate her husband, and there had been over 150 people that had attended the service to bid Wes a final goodbye. So many tears had been shed at the service, as Wes had been a good man and loved by so many. It was a week after her husband's death that Claudia's 22-year-old son Jack appeared to be resolutely determined on going off on a solo camping adventure on the Appalachian Trail in the midst of all of his grief, as after losing his father, he claimed he needed some time to himself to reflect over his loss and to get his bearings again. Claudia had been understanding and sympathetic about Jack's need for some personal space. She appreciated that for Jack, camping out in nature might be a way for him to emotionally heal from the wounds and scars of losing his dad. Jack, like his father West, had been an avid outdoor enthusiast. Indeed, when he was growing up, the Hannon family had gone on multiple camping adventures together, and there were times when some of their best memories had been fully realized. Claudia assumed that for her son Jack, going on this intrepid trip up the Appalachian Trail might be a way for her son to feel as if he was closer to his father, and she could perfectly understand why he would feel this way. "You do what you need to do," Claudia had told her son, wrapping him warmly in her arms as the two of them sobbed together in each other's shoulders. "Losing your father has been tough on the both of us. It hasn't been easy. It's been quite awful to see such a robustly healthy man become all but a twig in the last days of his life. I appreciate that we grieve differently. If going on a solo camping adventure up the Appalachian Trail, which I know you and your father wanted to do when he was alive until he got sick, of course, if that's therapy for you, darling, then do it. That's what I say. Don't mind me. I don't know why you're even asking me about this. Why should you ask me permission? This is your life, Jack. You're 22 years old, for goodness sake. You're entitled to do exactly what you like. You don't need my approval." "But I do need your approval, Mum. It's very important to me that I get it. Age has absolutely nothing to do with it. To tell you the truth, I'm extremely worried about you being alone at home, grieving Dad's passing on your own. You could be very lonely. It feels selfish and self-centered of me just abandoning you like this, and I don't feel good about it at all." "Don't be ridiculous, sweetheart. We both knew your father was dying. We said our farewells to him, did we not? We have both been cooped up in this miserable environment for a long enough time, and I think going on the Appalachian Trail, if that's what you want to do, might just be what the doctor ordered. There's no need for you to hang around me just to prop me up. I'm going to be fine on my own, I promise you that." "But are you sure, Mum?" Jack asked her, looking at her through red puffy eyes that had shed far too many tears after the last week, as Jack had not taken his father's passing very well. "If I go on this camping trip, I do feel as if I'm abandoning you. Don't you need my support? Don't you need me at home here with you to comfort you in your grief? If you don't want me to go, just say the word, and I won't do it." Claudia had affectionately cupped her hands around her son's handsome face and looked into his brown eyes very tenderly. She was struck by his likeness to her husband. He rarely was the splitting image of his late father. Even though Wes was dead, a big part of him was clearly living on through her son, which was very comforting and reassuring for her. "Look, darling, we've been through hell and back as a family, have we not? Watching your father waste away before our eyes in the way he did. Cancer is a cruel, brutal, and unforgiving disease, and it can punch you in the face, leaving you permanently battered and bruised, as if you've been in the boxing ring with Mike Tyson. And I don't say that at all lightly, you know. We are the ones left behind that have to pick up the pieces and get on with our lives, don't we? Even though we knew your dad was dying, once it happened, although it was a relief to know that he was freed from his pain, it certainly doesn't change the fact that we are both devastated he's gone from our lives. And our lives will feel a lot emptier without him around. If he was here right now, I know what he would say. He would not be wanting you to grieve for him. We did enough of that when he was still alive, did we not? He told you himself that if you live your life to the fullest, you'll be honoring his memory. That's what we need to do, Jack. If going hiking and camping along the Appalachian Trail helps you make your peace with your father's passing, you should absolutely do it, and no one should discourage you, least of all me. And I don't want you to worry about me. I'll be absolutely fine. I can assure you of that. Jack had gone off on his camping adventure, promising to return a week later. But when he didn't come home as he had promised, Claudia had sounded the alarm, fearing the very worst for her son. Jack was a reliable young man, and when he said he'd be back in a week's time, she'd have expected him to honour his word. Instead, she hadn't heard a dicky bird from him, and began to naturally panic. She alerted the authorities, and a search was undertaken to find her son. But all that was found was an empty tent, pitched in an alpine field, dotted with trees. And the tent contained all Jack's belongings, but there was no sign of her 22-year-old son, whom it would seem had all but disappeared into thin air without a trace. Some backpackers told the police that they had actually passed Jack on the Appalachian Trail. They said he'd been in good spirits and had greeted them politely and then gone on his way. Ostensibly with Jack's tent and belongings all abandoned and with no sign of her son to be seen, it was assumed that Jack Hannon was dead. Some might have believed that he had taken his own life because of the grief he had experienced in losing his father after his long drawn-out illness. The ramblings in his diary in which he had written about his dark thoughts in losing his father seemed to add weight to some of these theories. Pastor Amish cleared his throat rather awkwardly. The sound seemed to break the silence in his office for a moment, as if Claudia had bounced back to reality. She looked away from the photograph propped up on his desk, and her head lifted up to resume a rather awkward eye contact with Pastor Amish. She was playing rather nervously with the tissue in her hands, twisting it into all kinds of shapes, which was probably a self-soothing gesture on her part. "I don't know what to say, Claudia," said Pastor Amish. "There really are no words. What can I say to someone in your very fragile position? Let's just say I've been counselling for many years, you know, seen people with all kinds of issues and problems, but sometimes it feels futile expressing my condolences, because they seem flat in the grand scheme of things, do they not? There is nothing that you could possibly say, Pastor Amish, to make me feel any better or worse than I do right now. I've lost everything. And if this is the kind of God we serve, I want nothing more to do with him. I've been coming to your church, St. Catherine's, for years, living my life as faithfully as I possibly can, trying my best in every conceivable way to be a good person. And all I get in return for my devout loyalty to God is suffering. Why has this loving God we serve turned his back on me? Why has he inflicted such wrath upon me? Try and explain that, Pastor Amish. If God is good, then why is my life lying around me in tatters, like pieces of shrapnel in a war zone? Explain that to me, will you? I'm sorry, Pastor Amish, but it's hard not to take this personally. It feels like God has just decided to poke me very hard with a very sharp metal instrument, because there isn't a part of me that is not hurting. They say we should do everything we can to avoid spending eternity in hell. But I'm in hell right now, Pastor Amish. I hope you appreciate that." Pastor Amish drew in a deep breath to calm down the rising thump of his heartbeat. Claudia was challenging her faith, and he had predicted that this would happen. This was by no means a new reaction from people of faith, hit by extreme adversity. He could perfectly understand why Claudia was beginning to doubt God, the God that she had served so faithfully for so many years. "I don't have answers for you, Claudia. I really don't," he said, shaking his head sorrowfully. "I wish I did. Why do bad things happen to good people? It's a question people have asked for centuries, you know. And you're right, life is not fair. But whatever you may believe, despite everything, God is good." "Oh yeah, right? God is good. Do you know how many people say that, Pastor? That's really lame. I'm sorry, but it is. I'm sure God is good to you, Pastor Amish. In fact, I can see he really is. Look at your life. Everything is hunky-dory for you, is it not? You have a delightful family, a beautiful home on the church grounds, an adoring congregation that attends the church and worships your every word. And so much more besides. In your eyes, God is good. And I'd likely feel the same if I had the rich pickings that your life has so obviously blessed you with. I, on the other hand, have not been so lucky and fortunate. My life has been like the gambler that goes into the casino with a whole lot of money, and after one game blows everything. What happened to me is just not right. It is not fair. So yes, I am blaming God. And I'm sorry, but he has turned his back on me." "The good Lord never turns his back on us, Claudia. We are the ones that often turn our backs from him, especially when we need him the most. And that makes things a whole lot worse, let me tell you. He draws close to us in times of hardship. You are not alone, Claudia, in your grief. Never alone. Don't ever forget that. Remember the story of Job. He went through hell and back, did he not? He lost everything that he cared about and loved. He was covered in sores and was in agonizing pain. And even then he refused to curse God, despite all the grievances that had been afflicted upon him. You see, he understood that God has a higher purpose for us all. We didn't come into this world to be wrapped in cotton candy. We came here to face challenges and to overcome adversity. A person cannot be all that God ordained them to be if they have life too easy. Look at Marie Antoinette in France, for example. She was completely out of touch with her people because she had life so incredibly good. She was royalty, so she had the finest in everything that life can buy you. She wanted for nothing. People in her time were starving. They were asking for bread, but all she could do was say, "Well, if they can't eat bread, why don't they just eat cake?" Imagine saying that to the people who were starving. She must have been incredibly ignorant and naive. She was the Queen of France and failed to appreciate the ailments of regular folk. Marie Antoinette was so disconnected to her people, and they hated her for her insouciance and insensitivity. For had she worn the shoes of some of those impoverished people, she may have learnt how tough life can be. But she didn't have a clue, did she? If she'd been through some tough challenges of her own, she may have actually had a heart. Instead, she was dismissive, cold, and calculating. So on a soul level, she was emotionally very immature. It is people who've been through grief that really are much more spiritually mature, much more compassionate, for they understand human suffering. So you're saying my suffering is good for me? Is that what you're trying to imply, Pastor Amish? Are you suggesting that I should be grateful to have lost absolutely everything, and as a consequence I should be praising God for inflicting his wrath on me, as he did on Job? Is that what you're saying? God has made me go through all of this because I'm more mature emotionally. Is that what you think? You sound ridiculous, Pastor Amish, and if you must know, I do wish my life had been wrapped in cotton candy. I'd welcome that. I really would. Pastor Amish began to inwardly squirm and chastise himself, for his conversation with Claudia Hannon was not getting any easier. Everything he said seemed to be inflammatory to her. Of course, he perfectly understood that she was angry with God. It was pretty standard, predictably normal behaviour. to feel the way that Claudia was feeling in her current position, and he couldn't blame her for that. He'd seen it enough in his counselling sessions with parishioners cursing God for their misfortunes. He needed to make Claudia see that out of suffering comes great strength, compassion, and human kindness, qualities that every soul needs to experience.
Look, Claudia, I hate to say this, but suffering is not all bad, you know. At some stage we all face adversity in our lives, whether we like it or not. And whether we like it or not, it does make us become better people. As I was pointing out to you, Marie Antoinette had no adversity in her life. She was insanely privileged. That was why she was so out of touch with the real world and with her people. If, on the other hand, someone on the French throne at the time had experienced what it was like to be impoverished and to go to bed at night with a growling stomach, I'm sure that leader would have had much more compassion towards his people and done everything in his power to obliterate the poverty. And guess what? The people would have responded in kind and loved him, and on a soul level, such a leader would be spiritually more advanced than someone selfish and self-entitled. Only when you have walked in someone else's shoes can you understand their pain. So yes, suffering does make us better people. But God assures us in his word that he will never inflict on us more than we can bear. So what you're going through currently, the Lord believes you can overcome. He has more faith in you, Claudia, than you have in yourself.
Are you kidding me, Pastor Amish? Listen to yourself. You're suggesting it's very good for me that I've lost everything in my life. Do you have any idea what you're saying? What I've actually been through? You talk about walking in somebody else's shoes. Well, try walking in mine. I'll tell you one thing. You certainly haven't experienced what I've experienced. Your spouse didn't die of pancreatic cancer 3 weeks ago. And your son didn't go missing a week ago and is assumed dead. Try wearing those shoes, Pastor Amish, and tell me exactly how you feel. And tell me what you think about God. I lost my husband to a long drawn-out illness. And now I've lost my beloved son. His tent was found empty on the Appalachian Trail. He appears to have vanished into thin air, and no one knows where he is. There's no sign of him. You have the blatant audacity to suggest my suffering is good, it's healthy for me, great for my spiritual development. Are you joking? Do you know how difficult it was just to get out of bed this morning, to come here for this session? It's a struggle for me to do anything these days, from having a shower to eating, and even getting dressed. And you think my suffering is actually good for me? Are you joking?
Claudia, you completely misunderstand what I'm saying, said Pastor Amish kindly. You're right. I have no comprehension of what it is like to walk in your shoes, and I don't pretend otherwise. You lost your husband 3 weeks ago, and now your son Jack has disappeared in his tent on the Appalachian Trail, and is assumed dead. If you want the truth, I don't think I'd be holding up as well as you, if I was wearing your shoes. And I'm going to be perfectly frank with you on this. When I talk about suffering, what I say is true. I know it's not palatable to hear for anyone. No one likes to be told that adversity can be the making of them. I remember I had a much-loved parishioner in my congregation, a woman called Eliza Higgins. She was dying of colon cancer. In the beginning, she was furious with God for it. She cursed and raged, she was angry, and then she reached a place of acceptance. And later, when I asked her if she wished she could take the cancer and all the suffering away, she said no, absolutely not, because during the dying process she had gained so much and grown exponentially as a soul. I could see when she said all this she was very sincere about it all, and she was looking forward to her death. She said she was looking forward to being reunited with God. Think about a marble sculpture, will you, Claudia? And you just have a sculptor who's going to blast away at that piece of marble to create a masterpiece. And if that piece of marble could feel pain, let's say it would be agony. But in the end, that piece of marble will produce a masterpiece. That's probably how God sees us. It can certainly be the same in our lives. Believe it or not, everyone goes through trials and tribulations, Claudia. Our lives are not immune to adversity. One way or another, hard times will afflict us all, at some point in our lives, even the most privileged among us. I'm not suggesting that what you've been through is fair, but I want to remind you that you are not alone. You are never alone. Think about it. There are suffering people there in war-torn parts of the world who have witnessed and seen atrocities so evil it would boggle your mind and leave you completely speechless, especially at the senselessness of it all. If you knew their stories, you would feel better about your own, as there is always someone on earth that is worse off than you are. I don't think for a second God is punishing any of these people. He loves us all unconditionally. But sometimes things happen in our lives that we believe will destroy us. But in the end, they can be the very making of us. I'm quite sure, Claudia, you will be like the phoenix rising from the ashes. I've known you all my life, Claudia. And after your parents were killed in that freak, very tragic accidents at the coast, when they were swept away by that rogue wave and washed to shore a couple of days later, I'll never forget your stoicism, your immense courage, and despite all your grief and your despair, you succeeded in picking up the pieces of your life and making something of yourself. And I know and trust that you can do it again.
What about this don't you understand, Pastor Amish? Said Claudia, glaring at him furiously. Yes, I've had a tough life, a very tough life, and I've had to rise above it all, because I haven't had a choice. I was an orphan whose mother was a drug addict. I was adopted by my new parents. They took me under their wings. But when I was in my 20s, they both died in a freak accident while on holiday at the coast. You're right. I did my best to overcome my pain. But it was very hard, Pastor Amish, you have no idea. There were days I'd go to bed sobbing my heart out and asking God why he'd taken my parents away from me. I couldn't understand any of it. It made no sense to me. It was so cruel. Later on, I got married to Wes, and he agreed to take on the Hannon surname and to move into my parents' home. He was such a wonderful husband to me in every possible way, and I felt incredibly blessed. So I was able to pick up the pieces of my life again. And then we had the most perfect baby together. And when that all happened, I believed that finally God was turning his generosity on me. And I thought, well, you know what? I can get through my life now. Things are good now. And for a while they were. Jack was such a blessing in our lives. But a day did not go by when I didn't think of my beloved parents and how much I missed them. You have no idea. I'd wonder how they would have enjoyed being grandparents, because they missed out on all that. And I find that very sad.
You're speaking the same language, Claudia, as people who have lost someone they love. It's a universal language that everybody understands. People never get over their losses in life, but they learn to live with them, which is what you did at the time, and what you need to do again. It's like driving through the mist. You may not see your way ahead of you clearly, but somehow you manage to get through it in the end and find your way back to safety. That's what you're going to need to do, Claudia.
You make it sound so easy, Pastor, with all your practical solutions. But do they actually work, I wonder? My life is a permanent mist, I hope you realize. I can never see my way ahead of me. I'm always stuck in the fog. That's my life at the moment. Everything is a struggle. It's impossible to get out of bed in the morning. It's a laborious chore just to go to the supermarket. Things like that are all-consuming for me.
Of course it's hard, Claudia. No one ever said it would be easy.
You know, Pastor Amish, when my husband got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and we all knew that it was terminal, you know what I thought, Pastor Amish?
No, what did you think, Claudia?
I thought to myself, not this again. I seriously wondered if I'd been brought onto this earth to live a cursed life of some kind. I was born the daughter of a drug addict. I got adopted. I lost my adopted parents, and now I've lost my husband. When Wes died, I thought I'd come to terms with losing him. I thought I'd overcome my grief once again, because at the very least I still had my boy Jack with me, so part of him still remained with me. In truth, after he died, I thought I was coping better than I imagined I would, until Jack never came home from the camping trip on the Appalachian Trail. It was then I felt as if my life had imploded.
I can imagine, Claudia. Well, actually, I can't imagine what you must have felt.
Believe me, Pastor Amish, there is nothing worse in the world for a mother than to have to face the death of a child. You never want your children to go before you do. And the worst thing about Jack's story is he's assumed dead. But nobody knows what happened to him. There's so much mystery around his disappearance. And that's worse than accepting he's dead. Because you know what? I have absolutely no closure. I will now always be wondering and second-guessing about what happened to him. So how can I be expected to sleep at night? My son is missing, Pastor Amish, and most people believe he's dead. I feel as if I'm in limbo. Pastor Amish rubbed his moustache, looking both reflectful and sympathetic at the same time. He felt so much compassion towards Claudia Hannon, but he needed to encourage her in any way he possibly could, as she was like sinking through quicksand. She looked so desperately aggrieved.
Of course you feel as if you're in limbo, Claudia. That's an excellent way to put it. Not knowing what happened to Jack on that camping trip up the Appalachian Trail has got to be torturous for you. When we don't know the whys about something, or even what actually happened to the person we love, it hits us very hard. It's brutal. I always say that even if the worst has happened to a person, it's so much better to have closure, to know what had happened. It's the not knowing that can be extremely taxing.
You're telling me, Pastor Amish, I barely get a wink of sleep at night these days. In fact, all I do is toss and turn and break out into a cold sweat. I'm not going to even mention the nightmares when I do manage to go to sleep. I sometimes wake up screaming in the middle of the night. I keep going over and over in my head about what could have possibly happened to Jack. If only I knew the answers to that question, I might find a small measure of peace.
That's exactly what you need, Claudia, is peace. And I will certainly pray to the good Lord that you will attain it, as will the congregation here at St. Catherine's. We have you on our prayer list, I'll have you know. For the record, I thought you coped admirably well at your husband's funeral. You were extremely stoic, very courageous and strong, much like you were at your parents' funeral. I was proud of the way you conducted yourself, as were so many of the parishioners here at St. Catherine's. They love you very much, Claudia, and they thought you were remarkably brave.
That's very kind of you to say, Pastor. I don't think I was brave at all. I was just very numb, to tell you the truth. I think during that funeral service, I was more like a walking robot, smiling at the right times and trying desperately not to cry. But brave? No, I wasn't brave.
Of course you were brave, Claudia. Admirably so. May I ask you one question, if you don't mind?
Ask away, Pastor Amish. I'm an open book. I've got nothing to hide. But a very sad one at that, you could say.
Well, when your husband was diagnosed, Claudia, with pancreatic cancer, I'm sure he must have discussed his impending death with you, did he not?
But of course he did, Pastor Amish. You know what Wes was like. He cared desperately about me and Jack. We were his whole world. He wasn't worried about dying at all. He was much more troubled about how we would cope with him gone, and how we would manage financially, so to speak. Even though I do have an excellent paying job. But he worried about the practical things in our lives that we wouldn't be able to fix if he wasn't there, like if the washing machine suddenly went off, and needed fixing or something. So he did try and help me fix things around the house, with his supervision. He didn't want me to have to rely on anyone else, you see. He told me that me and Jack must get on with our lives, and that he would be watching over us from the other side. And I sincerely hope he is, Pastor Amish. But I can't say I feel him around me. Every day is as empty as the next one is.
Wes was a very kind soul, the pastor agreed. He never thought of himself, did he? But in a way you must have been prepared for his death. When a member of your family has a terminal diagnosis, one has to make peace with it, And by the sounds of things, you did reach a place of acceptance, did you not, as far as Wes is concerned?
I don't think I was ever prepared for Wes's death, Pastor Amish. But I told myself that at least I had Jack, and together the two of us would overcome our grief. We would be there for each other, you see, to support each other in the ups and downs of life. But now Jack is gone. It's like my life has crumbled in my hands like a piece of dry toast. It's like I've lost my will to live. What's the point in anything anymore? I've lost the two people I love best in the entire world. Life is about relationships, Pastor Amish, with people. It's not about the things we accumulate. If you must know, I do blame God. There, I've said it. I know there are people out there worse off than I am. Of course I do. I'm not in denial about that. But everywhere I go, I see happy families at the grocery store, the coffee shop. And you know what I think, Pastor Amish?
No, what do you think, Claudia?
I think, why me, Pastor Amish? You're probably thinking, why not me? But I do think, why me? Why not any of these other people? Why have I been personally singled out for destruction by God? He might as well take a sledgehammer and thrust it upon my life. I've got nothing left, Pastor Amish, nothing. Least of all a resolve to actually go on. I dream, Pastor, of not waking up in the morning, so I won't have to experience this tormenting grief ever again. But when I wake up and realize it's another day and I'm still very much alive, I will confess I'm bitterly disappointed about that.
I'm not going to say I understand what you're going through, Claudia, because I would be lying. You have been put through the mincemeat grinder, and no, it's not fair. How about you tell me a little bit about Jack and this camping trip of his on the Appalachian Trail? I want to get a greater picture of what may or may not have happened to your son, and it's good for you to talk about this. In fact, I encourage you to do so.
But I don't want to talk about this again, Pastor Amish. It's so distressing for me. I've been over this so many times with the police, and all it's done is made me more and more upset.
Of course, discussing things that are uncomfortable is very distressing, Claudia,
said Pastor Amish sympathetically.
With that stash of emotions, well, it's going to cause many issues for you. You see, Claudia, avoidance makes things so much worse. The next thing you know is you begin to face adversity in your life that is cruelly manifested physically. There is a physical need for the human body to purge out any grief, and it has to do it in some way or other. Otherwise, disease will be manifested, such as cancer, and I don't want that for you. You need to allow your painful emotions to vent themselves, like releasing the smoke from a chimney. It has to go somewhere, you see. I believe crying and talking about things that hurt is extremely healing. Ostensibly, if you think about the chimney I'm talking about, and there's no space for the smoke to escape, you're going to have a whole host of problems caused by that blockage in the chimney. That is what these counselling sessions are all about. It's for you to be able to reach a point of acceptance, Claudia, and from thenceforth you can begin to heal. Supposing my house, for example, has been badly damaged by a flood, and I walk into the house but refuse to acknowledge the damage, or what needs to be repaired and fixed. Suppose I continue my life and pretend all is well. Then things get significantly worse inside my home, because of all that flooding and all the damage that has been done. So it descends into decay. The ceiling in the house will likely crumble, and possibly fall on my head, if I don't address what needs to be fixed. Do you understand what I'm saying, Claudia? We can't run away from our pain, because sooner or later it's going to catch up with us, and when it does, it's not going to be pretty.
So you think my grief can be fixed? Is that what you're suggesting, Pastor Amish? I applaud you for your confidence on that, but I can assure you you're wrong. My grief cannot be repaired. For your information, there's a huge gaping hole in my life, and not even God can fill it in for me.
Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Claudia. Any gaping hole can be filled, especially by Jesus. He can put you together again, if you will allow him into your heart and ask him to guide you through the storm. As with Jesus, you can overcome anything, as hard as that may be for you to believe. Look at when there was a storm out at sea, when Jesus was on that boat with his disciples. What did he do? He spoke to the storm, and it subsided. He can do the same for you if you put your trust in him, Claudia. I've counselled many a cynical parishioner, Claudia, who have all told me that there is no way they'd be able to get through their grief. But 3 years on, these very same parishioners of mine are thriving. I'm not saying they're ever the same again after their losses. Nobody ever is. But they've managed to overcome and make something positive out of their lives. And I want the very same for you, Claudia. And I know you can do it. I have the utmost faith in you.
You think I want Jesus in my heart? After everything that happened to me, Pastor Amish? You think, like some of these other people that you've counselled over the years, that I'm going to overcome my adversity and make a new path for my life? Are you kidding me? My life is as good as over, Pastor Amish. Without my husband and son around, what on earth do I have to look forward to any more? Absolutely nothing. I don't even see the point of getting up in the morning. Everything for me these days is drudgery. It's always a laborious chore. It's like the whole world has lost its spark and has become grey and cloudy. I feel like a burnt-out candle wick that can no longer be lit because I'm so damaged. I've been coming to St. Catherine's for years and years, as you well know. I've prayed to God incessantly, and what do I get for my devotion? 2 dead adopted parents, a dead husband, and now a seemingly deceased son, with absolutely no closure in sight whatsoever. It seems like praising the Lord has led me straight to hell rather than to heaven. So I'm very sorry to say, Pastor Amish, I know this is not what you want to hear, and frankly I don't actually care. But I'm done with God, thank you very much. And as for your counselling sessions, I don't know why I even bothered to come here today. All you're going to tell me is to buckle up, tighten my seatbelt, because things will get better. But I know they won't. The road ahead of me is grim, like a traffic jam that I can't get through. I feel stuck on this road, as if there is no end in sight. No way back home, if you know what I mean. My home is with my family, Pastor Amish, and they're all gone from my life. And without my son, I feel as if I can hardly breathe, as if all the oxygen has been unscrupulously sucked out of my lungs.
You don't know whether Jack is dead, Claudia. He may still be alive. Why are you so quick to give up on your son? You don't know what happened to him. There is still hope, is there not? His body was never recovered.
This time Claudia glared at Pastor Amish. How could he be so ignorant? If he was trying to make her feel better by applying some hope in this counselling session, it wasn't going to work. She wasn't stupid. The tent that Jack had been camping in had been found empty. Police believed the worst and had told her as much. The police knew what they were doing, for they had dealt with a plethora of missing persons cases before, and most of them hadn't ended well. The officer dealing with her case had told her as much. The police had used search dogs and helicopters to try and locate the whereabouts of Jack, but it had been a fruitless endeavour. The cadaver dogs that were employed on the search had not picked up any scent trail that would ultimately lead to her son's whereabouts. As it would seem, no trail of his scent was ever recovered. So the mystery of what had befallen him on his Appalachian camping trip had left many completely stumped, and with more enigmatic questions than answers. There was also the diary to consider that was found in the tent, in which her son had expressed his deepest, most troubling thoughts, for losing his father so tragically to pancreatic cancer had left Jack feeling hopeless, very lost and confused, which was why some people thought her son had committed suicide. But he wouldn't do that, would he? Claudia had reasoned with herself dozens of times over this, and she kept coming to the same conclusion. Jack would never kill himself. Claudia knew her son very well, and on many occasions they had talked about people who took their lives through suicide. And Jack had said,
"I'd never do that, Mum, even if I was at rock bottom, because life is a gift, isn't it? We should live it to the fullest."
Jack had always been an upbeat child with a positive outlook towards life. Granted, he had received a knockback after his father had died, for they had been extremely close, and yes, he was devastated his father was no more. But would the pain of losing his dad tip him over the edge? Claudia didn't think so, nor did she believe that that is what had happened. "Pastor Amish, I don't know what you want me to say. Jack went on the Appalachian Trail. His tent was found abandoned. How many times do I have to tell you this? And you're suggesting he might still be alive? Are you insane? It's obvious that Jack is dead. Even the police believe as much. People have been saying I should discuss having a memorial service for him with you here at St. Catherine's. But I can't go there now, Pastor. I'm not willing to let go of Jack just yet. I'm not willing to accept he's dead. I just can't do that. It's all too much for me to stomach at this point in time. So I'm not going to discuss any memorial service with you. So don't even think about talking about that with me." For a moment, Pastor Amish looked at Claudia reflectively, as if he was meditating on her very words. He tugged at his moustache and said, "Tell me something, Claudia. Do you feel in your gut that Jack is dead?" The solemn tone of his voice suddenly lowered by several decibels. His eyes fixed steadily on Claudia, with an intense gaze, which was somewhat disconcerting because it was so piercing. What was the pastor on about, Claudia wondered. Her son Jack was assumed dead. So why was Pastor Amish asking her such a bizarre, almost preposterous question? "Why would you ask such a nonsensical question, Pastor Amish?" said Claudia, looking somewhat befuddled. "It's not what I feel that matters, it's what I know. Since when do feelings ever count for very much? I would have thought feelings were notoriously unreliable. Jack's tent was found abandoned. They searched for him everywhere. They found no trace of him. Of course he's dead. Isn't that obvious? For a pastor, you don't half ask some objectionable questions, if you don't mind my saying." "The evidence suggests he's dead. I do agree with you on that, Claudia," said Pastor Amish. "But as a mother, in your heart, what do you actually feel? Do you believe in your gut that Jack is really dead? Answer me that one question, Claudia, and think about this very carefully. There has been no sightings of your son to date, but do you actually sense that he is dead, deep down in your gut? Sometimes the answer we're looking for is directly within us." "I don't believe in my gut that Jack is dead, Pastor Amish. But what has that got to do with anything? Maybe I refuse to consider that he is dead, so I'm in denial, as the evidence seems to suggest otherwise, and it would seem he is no longer in life. But do I feel that he's dead? Absolutely not."
"Ah, we're finally getting somewhere, aren't we?"
said Pastor Amish. A light seemed to go on in his eyes. This was good news, he thought, for in his experience the gut didn't lie. So if Claudia Hannon didn't really believe her son was deceased, then really there was hope, for a mother always knew in her heart whether their child was dead or not. Pastor Amish was certain of this, although his approach to talking about such a matter like this was extremely unorthodox. He didn't want to give Claudia Hannon false hope, but if she genuinely believed that Jack was not dead, well, then maybe he wasn't. "What is that supposed to mean, Pastor Amish? What exactly are you trying to say? Spill it out, will you?"
"Well, it means maybe your son is not dead. I've been doing counselling sessions for many years, Claudia. One thing I've learnt about the gut is it never lies. The gut is an inbuilt intuition that if you tune into it properly will give you the answer you seek. People get sparks of intuition in their lives over so many things, but many people willfully ignore that seat of knowledge within us that warns us not to take that flight that may potentially crash. The gut is like an inner nudge from God himself, like a radio signal that you tune into. And if you pick up on the correct frequency and focus, well, you'll end up being empowered by an inner knowledge that gives you the answers you so obviously seek. I know a woman who lost her son in a car accident, weeks before her son's death. She had a feeling in her gut, almost like a premonition, you could say. She just knew she'd never see her son getting married in the future. In that moment she felt really horrible. She wondered where this feeling had come from. It came from the seat of knowledge within every human soul, called the gut. She tried to envisage her son getting married one day, but she couldn't see it, because somewhere deep inside herself, she knew it would never happen. True enough, a few months later her son died tragically in a horrible car accident, so her gut feeling was confirmed to be true. Then there was the case of a young teenager, killed in mysterious circumstances, his throat brutally slashed. He was found lying deceased near the railway tracks. This young man that was tragically murdered had a best friend called Slough Peterborough. That's what I think his name was, if I remember correctly. Anyway, Slough Peterborough had a mother who took one look at her son, who was best friends with a teenager that had been brutally killed. And when she asked Slough what had happened to his best friend, he shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly and said, "How am I supposed to know?" His mother took her son to the police station at once. You know what she told the officers? No, what did she tell them? She said, "I love my son, and although he hasn't admitted to doing anything, I know he killed his friend. He did it." "How can you know this, ma'am?" the police asked the mother. Her answer was very simple and to the point. "I know my son, officer. I feel it in my gut. I know he did it. Question him. He'll confess, I can assure you of that." "And was the mother right about believing her son had killed his teenage friend?" Claudia asked Pastor Amish. "Yes, she was. You see, Claudia, the mother instinctively knew the truth. That's why she took her son to the police station very promptly. Her son was charged with murder. So it cost her a great deal in offering him up to the police like a platter of salmon, so to speak. But sometimes you just have to do the right thing, don't you?" "Well, I suppose so," Claudia admitted. "I must admit I am impressed with the mother, doing the right thing. If Jack had murdered his best friend, not that he'd ever do something like that, of course, I'm not sure I'd be able to give him up to the authorities. I'm so protective over my son." "You say that, Claudia, but you're a godly woman, and I personally believe you would do the right thing. When kids are punished for their wrongdoing, they learn from their mistakes. And I dare say that young teenager who murdered his friend, for God knows what reason, apparently it was over some girl, well, now he's locked up in a prison cell, probably nursing a great deal of regret." "There are no winners in a story like that, are there?" said Claudia. "The victim's family loses, as does the perpetrator's." "You're not wrong about that, Claudia. I want you to think about this long and hard, and I want you to be extremely honest with yourself, even though it's not easy. Think about that poor woman when she realized in her gut that her son was guilty of committing murder, and she was willing to go to the police about it. Lots of people would not have been as brave as she was. They would have lied to themselves. They would have convinced themselves that their son had never murdered his best friend. Because we can do that to ourselves, you know, Claudia. We can lie to ourselves very successfully. Convince ourselves that no, our son would never do that. We tell ourselves things we want to hear and believe, because the alternative is too uncomfortable. But I want you to take an impartial view of your intuition and tune into it like a radio signal. Can you envisage Jack getting married one day? Can you see it in your mind's eye? Can you imagine him having a wife and children? Can you see yourself becoming a grandmother one day? Or when you try to envisage these scenes in your head, are they impossible to imagine? Can you visualize them or not? Tell me what you see." "I don't need to do that, Pastor Amish. Of course I can see my son in my current life. Only he's not here, is he? So obviously my gut is tuning into the wrong frequency. I'm probably not as tuned into my gut as that woman who took her son to the police and told them he was responsible for killing his best friend was. If you must know, I always believed Jack would marry one day and would have children, and I would become a grandmother. I never doubted that for a single second. But it seems my instincts into this were either misguided or completely screwed up. Perhaps I was lying to myself all along. Well, I'm glad to hear you can envisage Jack in your life, and you're becoming a grandmother to his children one day. Now, let's look at the opposite scenario. You can tell me what you see in this one. When you think of your late husband and the dying process he went through, did you hold out any hope that Wes might finally recover from his illness, that he might get well again? Did you ever see in your mind's eye the two of you becoming old together? Think about it for a moment. These are painful questions to ask, but if you can be completely honest with yourself, you can tune into your intuition. If people could do this without bias, they could tap into so much truth, let me tell you. No, once I knew he was going to die from what the doctors told me, I didn't think there'd be any future for us. And no, I knew we wouldn't grow old together. I could sense it, I suppose. I knew our lives had come to a full stop. I knew pancreatic cancer had the most deadly reputation. It's the toughest cancer to defeat, you know. Everybody knows that. But even if it was a cancer that could be overcome, I never saw Wes getting better in my mind's eye, so to speak. I didn't hold out any hope for him making a full recovery, even with all my prayers. At the time, could you have imagined your husband attending your son's wedding one day? Oh, no, definitely not. I never imagined him being around for Jack's wedding. Even before he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, would you believe it? I remember trying to envisage that scenario, but I just couldn't. And that was rather troubling, I have to say. Well, there you go, Claudia. The seat of your intuition is in your gut. You knew that your husband wouldn't be around when your son got married. The truth was in you all this time, and although you tapped into it, you did what most of us do, refuse to believe it. So you really think that Jack could possibly be alive? Because I don't see him as dead. Do you realize how insane you sound, Pastor Amish? You're being idealistic, fanciful even. But you've got this all wrong. All the evidence unequivocally points to the contrary. It shows that Jack has got to be dead. How many times do I have to go over this with you, Pastor Amish? His tent was found empty on the Appalachian Trail. Isn't that enough to say that something went terribly wrong on that trip? I'm surprised you're encouraging me to have a false hope, Pastor Amish. Isn't that the last thing you should be doing in these counselling sessions with me? I'm not trying to give you false hope, Claudia. That is the last thing I intend to do. You're here to be counselled and to discuss your feelings, which is exactly what we're doing. You have told me you don't feel that your son Jack is dead, even though the evidence points to the contrary. Yes, it is a grave possibility he may well be deceased. But what I'm trying to say, Claudia, is don't underestimate the power of your gut. All too often we ignore this gift of God. If in your gut you feel your son is not dead, and if you imagine his wedding day one day in the future, then unless you are lying to yourself, I say to you that there's a distinct possibility that your son may not be deceased. Maybe he wanted people to think he was dead. Perhaps he was so traumatized by recent events that he wanted to escape from the struggles of everyday life. It wouldn't be the first time this has happened to people. I know that in Japan, for example, they make a big business of helping people disappear off the face of the earth, so that no one knows what the hell has happened to them. They might even go so far as to help the people stage their own deaths. Some people find life so tough, for emotional or psychological reasons, so they disappear because the pressure of life gets too intense. They deliberately go missing, and then they start off all over again. There are so many stories of people like this, who are assumed dead, but years later are found alive, well and flourishing. It happens more frequently than you know. People are complicated, and sometimes they do things that surprise us all. There's a distinct possibility that Jack may have deliberately abandoned his stuff to make it appear that he'd come to some harm. Maybe he wasn't coping well with the challenges he was facing. You yourself say, Claudia, that his diary entries were very dark, expressing the frame of mind he was in when he wrote them. And that in itself is a big clue to me. Claudia, tell me, how badly did your son take his father's death, do you think?
Well, that's another ridiculous question, Pastor Amish. Jack didn't take his father's death well. It hit him hard, of course it did.
Did he talk about his feelings to you on the matter?
No, he didn't. He was, what's the word?
Closed up, perhaps. Rather reticent to talk about it.
I think he was scared he'd upset me by sharing his feelings.
Well, that's perfectly natural, Claudia. People often keep their feelings bottled up to avoid causing distress. So tell me about the diary the police found.
Well, it made for tough reading, didn't it? I read the diary, not because I wanted to be nosy, but because I needed to understand my son's mindset at the time, so I could get a better picture of what may or may not have been going on in his head.
Of course you'd have to do that, Claudia. You needed answers, and so did the police. Tell me about what Jack wrote in his diary.
Well, I can't exactly tell you word for word what he wrote, but let's just say my son was hit harder by his father's death than I imagined he would, said Claudia, looking somewhat teary-eyed. It was all there in the diary, which made some people, including the police, falsely conclude that my son had taken his own life. But I can assure you, Pastor Amish, I don't think my son would do that to himself. He just wouldn't. I could be wrong, of course, about this. Maybe in denial, because I just don't want to believe it. But if the truth be told, I think I would rather my son was ravaged by a dangerous wild animal than willingly trying to harm himself. Somehow, him being killed by a wild animal, rather than committing suicide, as insane as this may sound to you, is a lot more palatable to me. I guess if my son did kill himself, then in some way I would feel completely responsible, almost as if in some way it would mean I had failed my son, failed to notice how incredibly depressed he'd become. But if he was killed by a wild animal, then I'm not entirely to blame for his death, and then his passing was then out of my control. Both scenarios, of course, horrifying. But if my son killed himself, that's the worst scenario of all for me to take on board, let's just say. So to answer your question, Pastor Amish, of course Jack was hit very hard by his father's death. We both were. As for this preposterous idea of yours that Jack might stage his own death, so people would assume he was dead, well, Jack would never cause me so much suffering. He knows how much I have lost in my life. He would never do that to me.
Tell me, Claudia, why did Jack want to go on this Appalachian Trail in the first place, especially so soon after his father's tragic demise? Perhaps he was trying to run away from his hurt. That's not uncommon, you know. Do you think that that was what he might have been doing? I mean, his diary certainly highlighted the fact that he was in a bleak state of mind at the time.
Maybe Jack was running away from his hurt. That's a good way to put it, Pastor Amish. I guess it was an escapism for him to go on this Appalachian adventure. And hand on heart, I certainly understood his need for some space. He's always been quite reticent about expressing his feelings, you know. So sometimes it's difficult to know what's going on in his head. I think losing his father got all too much for him. You know, he and his father were very close, very passionate about the outdoors, you know. Our family would regularly go on the most amazing camping adventures together. By all accounts, after Wes got diagnosed with cancer, those intrepid outdoor adventures of ours that we'd enjoyed so much came to an abrupt halt, I'm very sorry to say. Wes was far too weak to undertake any of those adventures anymore. After Wes died, Jack took me to one side and told me very discreetly that he needed some time to himself and wanted to go solo camping on the Appalachian Trail. He thought it would help him emotionally come to terms with his father's passing. So I actively encouraged him to go ahead and do what his heart was telling him to do.
How did you feel about that, Claudia? About Jack going on the Appalachian Trail so soon after your husband's death? I can't imagine that was easy for you. Wes dies, you're in a rock-bottom place emotionally in your life, and your son Jack saunters off into the wilderness, leaving you to deal with your grief alone. That must have been tough on you. You must have felt rather abandoned and lonely, as the only one who could relate to your grief was your son. And he wasn't exactly there for you when he up and left in the way he did. Some might say that that was an insensitive, unkind thing for him to do.
Well, if the truth be told, Pastor Amish, I'm going to level with you. I wasn't very happy that Jack wanted to go on this trip. I mean, we were both in a vulnerable place in our lives, grieving his father's tragic passing. I have to say, I would have liked Jack around during this tumultuous period of time. But you're right. He was the only person that could relate to what I was going through. So I would have enjoyed his support. Everyone says when someone dies from a long drawn-out illness that after their deaths there's a huge sense of relief. And you're also prepared yourself for the end so you're able to cope with it a little easier. But that is not entirely true. Death is never easy, even if you are prepared for it. And like you said, I don't think Jack took things terribly well. When he asked me if he could go on this Appalachian adventure, how could I refuse him? I couldn't think of my own needs before his. I had to put him first over myself, as any mother can appreciate. I knew he needed to do this. He's an adult in his own right. He can do what he wants to do. And actually I realized that such a trip might be a very good idea for him. But I didn't have a good feeling about it. If you're talking about gut instincts, Pastor Amish, in that regard, well, I felt nauseous when he said he was going, as if it was a bad idea for him to leave. But I told myself that I selfishly felt this way because I didn't want to be left on my own, to wallow in my grief. But even if I believed something bad was going to happen to Jack, how could I stop him? I may be his mother, but it's no business of mine to tell him what he can and cannot do. Jack is 22 years old. He's a man in his own right, is he not?
You see, Claudia, you've done it again.
Done what, Pastor Amish? You're losing me.
You said you had a nauseous feeling about Jack going on this trip, did you not?
Well, I sure did.
Well, that's your intuition speaking, Claudia, warning you that maybe something is going to go terribly wrong on that trip. But I understand perfectly why you couldn't share your misgivings with Jack. I don't want to give you hope, Claudia, and say that Jack chose to disappear. But I ask you to invite all possibilities. Your son has either died because he was killed in an accident, attacked by a wild animal perhaps, or even a deranged human being who he stumbled across accidentally on the trail. Maybe he was abducted or even harmed. Maybe he committed suicide because he was so grief-stricken, or he chose to disappear deliberately, leaving everyone to falsely believe he is dead. What is your feeling about your son, Claudia? Let's hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
Well, when you put it like that, Pastor, I will say that I felt nauseous about him leaving for the trip. But I don't for a second believe he's dead, said Claudia, her eyes widening, as if she too was surprised by the pastor's words, and what she herself was now uttering out aloud, for it all seemed so incongruous for her to be saying all this. But as the words flowed off her tongue, she knew they felt like the truth. I don't think Jack would kill himself. He could have had an accident, been abducted, as you say, or he could have run away from his life. But dead, I cannot see it, not even in my wildest imagination. I just don't believe he's dead. But I could be lying to myself, Pastor Amish. As you keep reminding me, it's very easy to lie to oneself. I mean, it's so much easier than accepting the truth, and that might be what I'm doing. I mean, if you imagine the worst or best scenarios, it doesn't mean that they're actually true. We can be very biased when it comes to what we want to believe. I don't want to believe my son is dead, but the police are in no doubt that he is gone. They think he met with a grisly fate, although I will admit they're clueless as to what happened to him. I guess everything is just speculation.
Well, maybe Jack did meet with a grisly fate, Claudia. I don't want to sugarcoat anything for you, but listen to your heart and pray about Jack. Ask the good Lord to reveal where he is, so that in some way you might find closure. The Bible says when we ask, we will receive. When we seek, we will find. And when we knock, the door will be open to us. The Lord honors his words to those who seek him with a pure heart. And that is what you are going to do."
"So you're going to get my hopes up, Pastor Amish, that my son Jack might be alive, and then dashed again like pieces of broken pottery, with a very real possibility that he is indeed dead."
All I want for you, Claudia, is to find peace. And hopefully if Jack is alive, you will find him too. I'm an ordinary man, Claudia. I wish I was God, Claudia, but I'm not. I'm just saying your gut instincts are extremely powerful, so listen to them. But also ask the good Lord to be your guide. It is only God that can give you the answers you seek.
When Claudia Hannon had left the pastor's office, she was feeling somewhat bemused. If this was supposed to have been a counselling session, it had all been rather peculiar, unconventional to say the least, and exceedingly unorthodox. She had thought that Pastor Amish would be reassuring her during her therapy session with him, and telling her that everything would be all right. And although he'd said those things, he'd asked her a question that had seriously ruffled her feathers, shaking her to the core, but in a good way, of course, as his words had offered Claudia a smidgen of hope.
Do you think your son is alive?
And if she could answer that question from a deep down gut level, she really did think he most certainly was. Why she felt this way she wasn't entirely sure, but mothers had instincts about their children, did they not? And if Jack was deceased, she would sense his spirit, or something, but she did not. She remembered her adopted grandmother telling her once that when her grandfather had died in hospital, when she was on her way to the hospital to visit him during visiting hours, while driving her Ford Fiesta, before she even arrived at the hospital parking lot, she had sensed his presence in her car with him. She had heard him say to her,
"I'm really free now. I can fly like a bird. Don't worry about me any more."
So when she arrived at the hospital, and the doctor had ushered her into a private consulting room to deliver the sad news to her, she had surprised him by saying, "He's dead, isn't he?"
"That's right, ma'am, he is. He passed away 5 minutes ago."
"I know," her grandmother had said. "He visited me in the car on the way here. His spirit, I mean. I think he was trying to say goodbye to me before he crossed over to the other side." The more that Claudia thought about this, the more convinced she was that her son was still alive. All her friends and people from church, and even the police themselves, had looked at her with sorrowful expressions on their faces. Many had expressed their extreme condolences of her loss. Some people, who had seen her locally in town, had avoided her and deliberately pretended not to see her, because they were too uncomfortable to say anything to her, as people are inclined to feel awkward about what to say to someone after a tragedy. By all accounts, the people giving her hope, or rather the person giving her hope, had been no other than Pastor Amish McGregor himself. She had always rather taken to the unassuming man, with his easy-going nature, but there was a depth to him that she hadn't seen before. But this counselling session had uplifted her spirits immeasurably, because she knew she had to do something about investigating Jack's curious disappearance. So she decided she would go hiking the Appalachian Trail herself, following exactly the same route her son had taken. She knew she didn't want to go alone. She was reasonably fit, as throughout her husband's illness she had made a conscious effort to go to the gym every single day as a matter of routine, even though sometimes she'd had to push herself to do so, for she hated the gym, but she knew she needed to keep strong for her husband's sake. For what good would she be to him if she also became ill? She had run on the treadmill for at least 45 minutes, and the daily physical exertion had enabled her to cope with the stresses of caring for her husband, even though he had been taken to a hospice towards the ends of his illness. So a lot of the nursing was thankfully taken out of her hands, and so when she visited him, she could enjoy quality time with him. She still continued to work at the time. She knew a man at work who always enjoyed going on hiking trails, and wondered if this man would be interested in accompanying her on this trip up the Appalachian Trail. It would be rather bold and presumptuous of her to approach him, for she didn't know the man in question terribly well. She had taken a leave of absence from work due to her husband's death, and was only due to return to work in a few weeks' time. But she decided to give this man a call. His name was Arthur Freeman. He was about 5 years her junior. She had seen him from time to time at office parties, but she only knew him well enough to say, "How are you doing?" But she had learnt that he enjoyed the great outdoors, and had regularly gone on the Appalachian Trail. There was no doubt he'd be surprised to hear from her, and wonder why someone who worked in a completely different sector in their company was giving him a random call like this. But she needed to do this, so before she could change her mind, she dialed through to his office and asked to speak to Arthur Freeman.
"Hello," came Arthur's crisp voice. "Arthur speaking. How can I help you?"
"Arthur, it's me. It's Claudia Hannon. I work in the admin section at work. We don't really know each other. I mean, we don't cross each other's paths all that much, apart from at social events and parties. But I'm the one that wears my dark hair in a bob, you could say. And I often wear the colour red."
"Oh, I know who you are. Is it really you, Claudia?" asked Arthur in surprise. "Are you sure it's me you need to speak to?"
"Oh, absolutely." For a moment there was an uncomfortable silence on the call, and then Arthur finally said,
"I'm really sorry, Claudia, about your husband's passing from his long illness. It can't have been easy for you. I also heard the dreadful, rather disquieting news about your son disappearing on the Appalachian Trail. I'm very sorry. I really am."
"Well, that's actually why I'm phoning you, Arthur. I was wondering if I could ask you a very big favour. Please feel free to say no to me. I appreciate that you hardly know me at all, so you aren't obliged in helping me in any way. I just thought I would ask. There's no harm in asking, is there?"
"Ask away," came Arthur's voice. "What can I do for you, Claudia?"
"I'm told you've been on the Appalachian Trail many times. I understand you're very experienced in that regard. It's common knowledge around the offices that you're very accomplished as an outdoor enthusiast, with a lot of experience behind your belt, which is certainly invaluable to someone like me."
"Yes, I suppose I'm reasonably skilled. I have been on the Appalachian Trail a few times. Why are you asking me this, Claudia?"
"Well, you know my son Jack. He went missing on the Appalachian Trail, and I need some closure. I really do. I'd like to retrace his steps, follow the route he took, along with camping at the place where his camp was found abandoned. But I don't want to go on this journey alone, because frankly, I'm very intimidated on taking that trip without someone who knows what they're doing to give me support. I know it's a huge ask, but would you consider accompanying me on this adventure? I would need to go in a couple of days' time, as soon as possible, actually."
"You want me to come with you on the Appalachian Trail, to retrace your son's footsteps? Is that what you want me to do, Claudia?"
came Arthur's somewhat bewildered voice. "Well, that's right. I know, as I was saying, it's a lot to ask of you. But if you could consider coming with me, I'd be enormously grateful. I really would. Your expertise would be invaluable, and I would appreciate the company. I'm not desperately good on my own, you see."
"I will do it with pleasure, Claudia. But are you sure you're fit enough to undertake a trip like this? I mean, I'm talking about from a physical perspective, but also from an emotional one. Are you emotionally in the right headspace at the moment? I'm sorry I have to ask you these awkward questions, because we could set out on the trip together, and it might prove to be overwhelming for you, or too much, so to speak. I mean, you're grieving at the moment, are you not? And that, along with the physical exertion of the trip, could take a huge toll on your body."
"Well, I am physically fit. I've been going to the gym for years. Physical exercise makes me relieve my stress. Even when my husband was dying, I always made a conscious effort to take long walks and trips to the gym that I hated, incidentally. The walks I loved, the gym I didn't enjoy. But I knew it would help me to face the challenges that I had to overcome at the time. I don't think, without the physical exercise, I would have been much good to my husband. It helped me cope, you see. And as for my emotional state, it is manageable to a certain extent. But if I'm doing something constructive, I think it'll help ease my troubles significantly. I think I can handle a trip. Besides, I don't have a choice in the matter. I really have to do this.
Well, in that case, I'm sure you will be up to the trip physically. But are you really sure, hand on heart, that you're strong enough emotionally? Can you really handle retracing your son's footsteps? Isn't that like opening a festering wound? I mean, how long has it been since your son's been missing? I mean, I only heard about his disappearance a couple of days ago or so.
He disappeared a week ago, but the searchers have all drawn blanks, and he's assumed dead. That's what the police believe anyway.
I'm very sorry, Claudia. That really is bad news. The worst kind of news that any mother wants to hear. I can't imagine what you're going through. So it's all very fresh for you, isn't it? Do you really think you're mentally prepared to cope with this?
Well, I need to do this, Arthur. And I have to say, if you refuse me, I will find someone else to accompany me. So not going on this trip isn't even an option for me. I would cover all your expenses, of course, but that goes without saying, doesn't it?
That's not necessary, Claudia. You certainly don't need to do that. May I ask you why you've chosen me, Claudia? Why do you want me to come with you? You hardly know me.
Well, I know you in passing, do I not? And as I said, I know that you've done a lot of these trips before. Word around the offices spreads like wildfire, as I'm sure you know. People have talked about you at great length, about many of the impressive challenges you've undertaken over the years. So when I thought of taking this trip, I will admit you were the first person that came to my mind, that I know has a great deal of experience in hiking. I don't want you to say you'll come with me because you feel sorry for me, and feel it's a charitable thing for you to do. I do want you to come because you genuinely want to.
Of course I genuinely want to come with you, Claudia. I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, am I? I usually go on my trips alone, although sometimes I'm fortunate to have my brother Jordan coming with me. But I do prefer company on my adventures, so I would certainly enjoy coming with you, and I mean that sincerely. I would consider it a privilege to assist you on this trek. I will have to get the time off work, of course, but that shouldn't be a problem. I am actually owed some leave.
After Claudia Hannon's phone call, Arthur Freeman sat there in his office, looking completely bemused. Claudia, of all people, had given him a call and asked him to join him on an Appalachian adventure. It didn't get better than this, although the manner in which she had asked him to join her on this trip was deeply personal to her, and very tragic, to say the least. Arthur was certain that Claudia needed to investigate what had happened to her son. She obviously felt retracing the route he'd taken on the Appalachian Trail might help her in some way, gain some kind of closure and acceptance of what might have happened to her son. Arthur Freeman didn't even know that Claudia Hannon had even noticed him before. When he'd joined the company 7 years prior, he'd always secretly nursed a crush on Claudia, but had sadly learned that the woman he really liked happened to be married to a very decent man called Wes Hannon. He did, of course, learn that 3 weeks ago that her husband Wes had died of pancreatic cancer, and now, about 3 days ago, he'd heard the horrifying news that Claudia Hannon's 22-year-old son Jack had simply vanished on the Appalachian Trail and was assumed dead. Arthur had been heartbroken for Claudia, wondering how that poor woman had been subject to so much grief. It really wasn't remotely fair that such terrible things had happened to such a beautiful woman. He had been stunned to realize that Claudia was seeking him out to go with her on the Appalachian Trail, and this was an opportunity to get to know the woman he had admired from a distance a whole lot better. Arthur Freeman had tragically lost his wife to breast cancer about 8 years prior, so he knew something about what it felt to lose someone you loved to such a devastating disease. After his wife Rosie had died, he'd sworn to himself that he'd never marry again, as the pain of losing his beloved Rosie had been raw and exceedingly gutting. He didn't want to go through such pain again. It was after Rosie's death that he had begun to embrace the great outdoors as a way of healing from his broken heart. He had hiked all over North America, from Alaska to the Pacific Northwest, and the more challenging the trip, the better Arthur had enjoyed it. He had loved hiking and the physical exertion it entailed, for it seemed to bring him the peace he so badly craved. He didn't want to become one of those people that turned to drink or drugs in order to soothe away his troubles. These days he'd earned quite a reputation for himself as an outdoor enthusiast, so everyone knew in the offices that if anyone was willing to undertake a physical challenge, it would be Arthur Freeman.
"Who was that on the phone, Arthur?"
asked his friend Duncan.
"You look as if someone's thrown an ice pick at your face. You've gone decidedly white. Oh, goodness gracious, someone hasn't died, have they?" "No, it's not that, Duncan. But yes, you could say I'm in a great deal of shock."
Duncan was Arthur's closest friend, and he had shared with him over the years that the only woman he had looked at since Rosie's death was Claudia Hannon. And Duncan had chuckled and said,
"Tough titty, bro. She's already taken. And besides, you're never going to get to know her if she works in admin. The admin people stick together like superglue, don't they? They make very little effort to get to know the other people in the company. They're a little stuck up, don't you think?" "You're in shock. What happened?" asked Duncan, looking curious. "That was Claudia Hannon on the phone," Arthur explained. "I can't believe she actually phoned me. I wasn't expecting that." "What? Claudia Hannon phoned you? The Claudia Hannon?" asked Duncan, looking baffled. "But why would she do that? She doesn't even know you, Arthur. And I mean, that poor woman must be in a very dark place at the moment. You do know her husband died of pancreatic cancer about 3 weeks ago. And now her son vanished a week ago, into thin air, I believe, while camping out on the Appalachian Trail. The young man is only about 22. He's assumed dead. It's a tragedy, that's what I say. So why would the woman phone you?" "I can't imagine she's in a good headspace right now." "Well, that's just it, she's not. That's why she phoned me. She asked me to accompany her on the Appalachian Trail. She wants to retrace her son's footsteps. She wants to go camping, where her son was last seen alive before he just disappeared, so to speak." "You're joking, right? Why would she ask that of you?" asked Duncan, looking more and more bemused. "My guess she knew I'd been on the Appalachian Trail a few times, and that I'm experienced when it comes to outdoor excursions. News travels fast around these offices, I suppose. So I take it you said yes." "Of course I said yes. How could I refuse the woman? But are you sure you want to do this, Arthur? Is it even a good idea? I know Claudia Hannon is lovely, but she's likely to be an emotional mess right now. The trip might be a nightmare for the both of you, especially for you having to hang around someone who's grieving. It's not going to be pleasant, let me assure you. It's all the more reason why I should accompany her. Don't worry, I may have had a crush on her for many years, but I'm hardly going to do anything about it. I'm not completely deranged, you know. The woman is grieving. She needs space and time to heal from her bereavement. But she sounded so resolutely determined to go on this trip. And if I don't accompany her, she'll find someone else to go with her. And I need to know she'll be safe, and she will in my charge. So I have to go with her to ensure her well-being, don't I? I would never forgive myself if something untoward were to happen to her. I get why you feel protective towards the woman you've always had a crush on," said Arthur. "But personally I think it's a bad idea retracing her son's footsteps. I mean, what will she achieve by that? I mean, she wants to follow the same trail he took. I think it's only going to make her grief escalate." "Maybe she needs closure," said Arthur. "Perhaps going on the Appalachian Trail will help her feel closer to her son. We all deal with grief in our own unique ways, do we not? And if going on this trip helps her, then who am I to judge her for this? I fail to see what good this will do, said Duncan sceptically. I think it's a train smash waiting to happen. I really do. I mean, the Appalachian Trail is a challenge to start with. And even if you're physically fit, if you're emotionally impaired, it's not a good idea to embark upon such a journey. I wouldn't do it myself, and I'm emotionally intact, so to speak. It's funny you should say that, Duncan, because you may be emotionally intact, and I'll agree with you on that. But physically fit you most certainly are not. When did you last do any exercise, bro? Beyond sitting at your desk behind the computer, drinking copious amounts of coffee to keep you awake, and raiding the cookie jar? Are you having a dig at me, Arthur? Is that what this is about? Of course I'm not. But it wouldn't hurt you, Duncan, to get some light exercise once in a while. If you must know, the best thing I ever did after Rosie's death was embarking upon some adventurous hiking trails. I missed her so dreadfully, and felt so alone in the world. I was falling apart at the seams. And one day, when I was buying some groceries in town, I looked in on a camping shop just by chance. And believe it or not, I walked away having bought a whole lot of camping gear. I realized I had a hankering to get away from my regular life, and it was the best thing I ever did. I found going on these trips helped me to come to terms with losing Rosie. I think they actually saved my life. So it may be for Claudia that going down the same camping trail that her son took might be therapeutic for the woman. Well, do what you need to do, bro, but tread carefully. That's my advice.
For the first 3 days of the hiking trip down the Appalachian Trail, it would seem that Claudia Hannon really didn't have very much to say, apart from the fact that she was appreciative that Arthur had agreed to come hiking with her. She apologized profusely for the fact that she knew she wouldn't be very good company for him, but Arthur was not offended by Claudia's lack of interaction with him. He knew all about grief only too well, for he had himself withdrawn from the world, and from people himself, after Rosie had died. So if Claudia didn't want to talk about anything, then so be it. He'd be there for her when she did. Claudia was impressively fit, and rather reminded him of a mountain goat. He had been quite taken aback by how nimble she actually was, and he enjoyed her company, even though she barely said very much. And despite the long silences between the two of them, never once did he feel awkward or uncomfortable. He knew what was going on, in a manner of speaking, of course. He knew that Claudia was a mother grieving the disappearance of her son Jack, and the last time she had seen him alive was before he left for his hiking trip, and they were now following the same route her son had taken. Arthur didn't know what it was Claudia was looking for exactly. One night, as they were camped out by a stream and sitting around the campfire, boiling their freeze-dried food in a pot of water, he decided now was the time to ask Claudia some rather awkward questions. For one, why had they come here only days after the police had given up searching for her son? And what exactly was she looking for? Did she think that coming on this trip would give her the closure she was seeking? It was a beautiful night. The trip had been pleasant. 2 days back they'd encountered a couple of hikers, but today they hadn't run into any people, so their trek had been quiet and very peaceful. Arthur felt reasonably mellow and content. He was a man of few words, so talking as far as he was concerned was overrated. He enjoyed being like a sponge, and allowing the natural world to fill him with its bounteous, rich rewards. The night was magnificent. The sound of wood crackling in the fire pit, and the aromatic smoke rising in the air, was extremely pleasant. When the food had boiled, he carefully plated it up for the both of them, on their own separate plates. It was a chicken curry served with rice. It was amazing how good things tasted when you were out in nature like this. "Thank you," said Claudia politely, as he handed her a plate of the curry, which she ate very slowly and deliberately. She looked rather reflectful, as she had done the night before. "It's a magnificent night tonight, isn't it?" said Arthur, trying to make conversation. "Look at the night sky. So many stars out there. The moon is pretty bright tonight as well, is it not?"
Yes, it's a beautiful night, it really is, Claudia agreed. Interesting today. We came across no hikers, did we? Well, I like it that way. It was so peaceful, Claudia said. Well, we're following the adventurous route your son took, are we not? And it's not for the faint-hearted, let me tell you. I'm impressed with how ambitious he was. I mean, you were also incredibly impressive, Claudia, if you don't mind my saying. Extremely fit you are. I underestimated you. Well, I suppose I'm just lucky. Because I am fit. I've been exercising every day of my life, practically, although I do take a couple of days off now and then. But if I hadn't been fit, God forbid, for this trail has been quite harrowing, I have to say. Claudia, tell me to mind my own business if you like. But what are you looking for on this trip? When I spoke to you on the phone, you mentioned you were looking for closure, but I have a feeling it's more than that. Did you come here because you were hoping to be close to your son? Or are you looking for something? Why would you think that I came here to feel close to my son? Said Claudia. I came here because of what Pastor Amish said. He is my pastor at St. Catherine's Church. What did your pastor say? Asked Arthur tactfully, wondering where this conversation was going, for it did seem to have taken a rather peculiar turn. Why would a pastor encourage Claudia to retrace her son's footsteps on the Appalachian Trail so soon after he'd gone missing? It seemed nonsensical and rather mindless. Was Claudia looking for some kind of closure, to come to terms with Jack's death? Did she really believe coming here would help her in that regard? As far as Arthur could see, Claudia had been very quiet the entire trip, and he wasn't sure it had done her any good, but he wisely kept those thoughts to himself. Claudia looked directly at Arthur and said, Pastor Amish asked me if I really believed if Jack was dead. In here, she said, pointing to her stomach. He said that I should know instinctively in my gut what the truth was within me. I did a lot of soul-searching on this, and I realized the pastor was absolutely right, and that Jack simply cannot be dead. There is no way he is. In my gut, I know he's alive. I mean, honestly, if he was dead, I know I would feel his spirit around me, and I don't. So I guess I'm looking for him. What I'm searching for, I'm not entirely sure. But maybe I won't even find it here. There's a distinct possibility that my son might have run away, staged his own disappearance, so people assume he's dead. According to Pastor Amish, it's not uncommon for people to stage their deaths in Japan, and to deliberately disappear, although I don't believe for a second that Jack has done that. But I can't dismiss the possibility that he may well have found his father's passing just all too much for him to bear. You're kidding, right? Asked Arthur, looking directly at Claudia, who looked so desperately vulnerable in her grief. He could feel her agonizing pain in losing her son. It was so tangible to him. He felt angry with the so-called pastor for giving Claudia what he considered to be false hope. It made the man a monster in his opinion. Of course Claudia's son Jack was dead. There was no doubt about it in his mind at all. As to what had happened to him was an enigmatic mystery, of course it was. But every year people all over North America disappeared, and were never found again. But Claudia appeared to be entertaining an unhealthy delusion that her son was still alive, which was insane as far as he was concerned. The last thing he wanted to do was discourage a woman with a broken heart and destroy her hope. But allowing her to believe something that wasn't true was almost equally as cruel. Arthur chose his words very carefully. Why would your son stage his own disappearance, Claudia? So that you would assume he's dead? I'm sorry, but that makes no sense to me at all. Maybe to you it doesn't, said Claudia, the irritation obviously discernible in her voice. Well, it makes sense to me that he could do something like this, although I think it's most out of character for him. But I do have to admit that he was going through a great deal of grief,
said Claudia, pulling out a black diary from her backpack. "This is Jack's diary. The police recovered it from his abandoned tent. Eventually they gave it to me. I want to tell you it makes for some very sorrowful reading. Let's just say Jack put on a brave face after his father's passing. It turned out he wasn't coping desperately well. In this diary he expresses so many dark thoughts, which are very troubling indeed. The police have considered the fact that he may have committed suicide, something that I cannot believe is even possible. They claim he was in such despair, but they're talking nonsense, because I know Jack would never take his own life."
"But are you sure?"
Arthur asked gingerly. "But of course I'm sure. I knew my son very well. He was very against suicide."
"So if you really believe Jack is still alive, where do you think he is?"
"Well, I don't know. That's the million-dollar question," said Claudia. "I have prayed about it long and hard. Coming here seemed like the right thing to do. But I feel as if I've hit a blank wall. The wilderness gives nothing away. It keeps its secrets close to its bosom, so to speak. And maybe the answers I'm looking for will never be found. Jack could be a long way away from here, starting a brand new life for himself without me. Maybe he just wanted to run away from his pain. People do that sometimes, when things get all too consuming for them."
"You really think Jack would abandon you in his grief?"
"Well, I don't think he would willingly choose to do that. I really don't. But then again, when your heart is very badly broken, you don't think properly about the people you hurt, do you?"
"You do realize, Claudia, the police believe your son is—"
"Don't say it," said Claudia, hurriedly raising her hand in the air to stop Arthur midway through his sentence. "The police know nothing. They don't know what they're talking about. They've been completely useless in this investigation. They are assuming the worst. There is a big difference between assuming, Arthur, and actually knowing. Assuming means you cack-handedly put the pieces together in a rather jumbled jigsaw puzzle that makes no sense whatsoever and decide this is what happened. But knowing is finding evidence to support your theory. The police do not know what happened to Jack. And Pastor Amish is right about that. I went to him for counselling and he asked me to tune in to my feelings. And so I did just that. In my gut, that's what I did. I listened to my gut. And I don't believe he is dead. But it is a possibility. He ran away. Maybe he was even abducted by someone. You hear stories, don't you? I mean, out here, Arthur, when you're camping solo in the wilderness, things can happen. You're very vulnerable. It can be incredibly dangerous. Over the years, there have been so many reports of missing people's cases. As to what happened to those people, there are so many speculations. But I do know one thing, Arthur, in my heart, that Jack is not dead. If he were, I'd definitely feel his presence around me, even if he just contacted me through a dream. When my parents were killed tragically by a rogue wave all those years ago and swept out to sea, when they hadn't even recovered their bodies, I knew they were dead. And you know how I knew?
"How did you know?" asked Arthur.
Well, I had a very vivid dream. I saw my parents standing on top of a hill, and I was at the very bottom of the hill staring up at them. I wanted to get to the top of the hill, I really did. And try as I might, I just couldn't climb that hill. They smiled down at me and said, "It's not your time yet." I woke up from that dream, knowing instinctively they were definitely deceased. It was almost like they'd reached my subconscious mind and were saying their goodbyes to me. I remember that dream so vividly. They were so very happy in that dream, as if they were in a better place. That vision brought me a great deal of comfort, let me tell you. But Jack has not entered my dreams, or made his presence known to me. And if he was dead, I believe he would do that.
"You really think the dead can contact the living?" asked Arthur, looking perturbed. "I mean, when my father died, I didn't have any kind of experience that you speak of. But then again, perhaps I'm not as sensitive as you are."
Well, I can't speak for other people, Only myself, Claudia insisted. I mean, I listened to a missing persons case a long time ago. It was on a crime documentary that I used to watch quite regularly. It was quite addictive, let me tell you. Anyway, this mother of a missing boy who vanished on a camping trip said unequivocally she knew her son was dead, even before they started to look for him. They asked her how she could possibly know this, and she said, a mother knows these things. And besides that, she claimed she'd felt her son's spirit around her. Do you know something, Arthur? She's absolutely right. I'm very close to my son, Jack. And I'm sorry, but if he were dead, I would know it in here, she said once again, pointing at her gut.
Look, Claudia, are you saying you feel that Jack is not dead because you don't want to accept the fact that he probably is? Are you perhaps deceiving yourself to ease your pain, to make things more bearable? If you're doing that, I completely understand.
How dare you say that, Arthur? Said Claudia. I know what you're thinking. I can see the pity in your eyes, Arthur. And I don't need your pity. Believe me, I don't. I know how I feel, and I am certain Jack is alive. I will read you a couple of articles in my son's diary to show you what a dark place that Jack was in, said Claudia, opening up her son's diary to read the last few entries it contained. Friday the 5th.
I'm so glad I came on this camping trip. My heart is exceedingly heavy. I had to spend some quality time in nature. It was the only way I could find any solace for my fractured soul that is so broken up. I don't think anything can possibly repair it. I've never experienced such a grievous loss. The loss I felt in losing my father. Of course I knew he was dying, as did he. I even said my farewells to him. I genuinely thought I was prepared for his passing, but I was not. My father was not just a father to me. He was my very best friend, and without him in my life I feel very lost, as if a big part of myself is missing. I couldn't bear to see how much pain Mum was going through after Dad's passing. It just broke my heart to see the grief on her face. That was so unbearable for me. I couldn't stick around my mother for very long. Seeing her grief on her crumpled face made my pain all the more palpable. I could hardly tell my mum how I was feeling. I knew it would upset her far too much. So I had to be courageously brave on her account. But brave I most certainly am not. The truth is I'm falling apart on the inside. I feel as if I'm barely functioning in my own life. I came here to get away from my life, and being close to nature has definitely helped to heal the hurt a little bit. But it feels like it will never go away. I feel as if I'm permanently numb. I've seen a few hikers on this trip who said hello to me. I think they would have liked to have enjoyed a little chat with me, but I pretty much brushed them off and went on my merry way. It's funny, even though I've been alone on this trip, I always feel as if I'm being watched, and at night I'm sure something has been stomping around my tent. Last night I was certain I heard very heavy footsteps around my camp, but when I cautiously opened the tent and looked around and about myself, nothing was there. It was an airy feeling, because I didn't hear any crickets, so the silence was almost deafening. But I wasn't remotely afraid. Why should I care, since I've lost so much already? I wanted to be alone anyway, and if I'm hearing things, it's probably all in my imagination. I'm overthinking everything, and I can't stop thinking about Dad. I feel really bad leaving poor Mum to deal with her grief alone. I know she must think I was selfish bogging off in the way I did. But I can't be around her, I really can't. It's all too much for me. I'm writing this in my diary in my tent with my torchlight, and I'm thinking I'm hearing those heavy footsteps again. It is rather creepy, but I'm not going to let anything intimidate me. I'll try to get a good night's sleep. Wow, said Arthur. That is a curious entry in your son's diary, if ever I saw one. What did the police have to say about it? Well, they felt the entry lent weight to the fact that Jack was suicidal. But he doesn't sound suicidal to me.
Yes, he sounds grief-stricken and broken up. But my son feels things deeply. But I don't believe for a second he was suicidal. I'm sorry, but I don't.
He talks about someone wandering outside his tent, doesn't he? Said Arthur. What did the police say about that?
Well, they didn't know what to make of it, did they? They assumed that maybe being on his own, he felt particularly vulnerable. He probably heard a wild animal, or something. Now, this was his last entry. Shall I read it to you? It must have been written when his tent was abandoned. And we will be camping in the same spot tomorrow night, will we not?
Of course we will camp on the same meadow close to the stream, where he camped out before he disappeared. Go on, read his last entry, will you?
Well, it doesn't make for easy reading, I have to say.
I want to hear it, said Arthur. If you must know, I feel unsettled when your son mentions in his diary the footsteps around his tent. It makes me think something untoward has happened to him, and I'm talking about something nefarious. Like you say, I'm highly doubtful he committed suicide, but someone could have potentially abducted him.
Well, I'm glad you finally agree with me, Arthur, said Claudia. That's exactly how I feel. Let me read you the last entry. Saturday the 6th.
I'm sitting here in my tent, feeling extremely ill at ease. Something doesn't feel right. When I went hiking today, I couldn't wipe the ominous feeling that I was not alone. If this experience did anything for me, it made me quickly forget about my father. Well, for a short while, that is. I was so creeped out. It was like something was following me while I walked down the trail. And even when I set up camp tonight, I sensed I was not alone, that something was watching me. I'm wondering if I'm becoming delusional, spending so much time on my own. Maybe I'm starting to lose my mind, see things that aren't actually there. Maybe it's making me paranoid, for I've never camped solo before. So every sound becomes extremely conspicuous. I'm still feeling remarkably guilty about leaving Mum to get on with things on her own back at home, even though I'm only here for a week. But that is searing away at my conscience. I've been on this trail with my father when he was well, although we talked about doing many more trips in Appalachia. I thought coming here would make me feel close to him out here in the wilderness, so that I could remember the good old times we had together. But camping here alone has made me feel ever so slightly uneasy. Very uncomfortable, you could say. Something hasn't felt right for a long while. But today the feeling of being watched just refused to abate. I'm very afraid that I'm going to hear those formidable footsteps again, stomping around my campsite tonight. I mean, they sounded sizable, but nothing was ever there when I peeked out of the tent. I'm feeling very affrighted, because I have a sense that I'm being hunted by something. I don't know why I feel this way. I suppose it's because I've never been comfortable with the dark, not completely. But when I was camping with Dad, I was never afraid. But on my own, everything is so spooky. When everything becomes quiet, and the crickets and frogs stop singing, that's when I'm most concerned. I'll probably look back on these notes of mine in the diary and laugh about it one day, about what a wuss I was on this trek. The truth is, at night, when I'm flashing my torchlight around me, I could swear I've seen an ambiguous dark shadow, with a pair of red eyes staring at me from behind a tree. But when I blinked my eyes and looked again, nothing appeared to be there. Absolutely nothing. What the hell is wrong with me? I'm seeing things that are obviously not there. Wow, that's his last entry, is it? Asked Arthur, looking at Claudia with wide eyes. You know what, Claudia? Your son Jack was definitely not suicidal. We can rule that out at once. Something bad happened to him in that tent, and I'm wondering if it's connected with the red eyes and the shadowy figure he claims to have seen. He also felt watched, and he felt as if someone was stalking him around his campsite at night. I'm surprised the police didn't pay closer attention to this information. I think your son was either attacked or abducted, by whatever it was that was stomping around his campsite at night. It might have been a weirdo. It could have been a wild animal, a bear perhaps.
You think my son's dead, don't you, Arthur? Why don't you just say it? Said Claudia.
Look, I think there's a 90% chance he's no longer in life. Sorry, I'm not going to sugarcoat things for you, Claudia, like your pastor did. I need to be honest with you. I don't want to give you false hope.
I knew you would say that, said Claudia. That is doubtlessly what everybody else thinks. But I'm sorry. I disagree with you. Jack is still alive.
I hope you're right, Claudia. But I'm afraid I don't hold up much hope for your son.
Well, you're probably right, said Claudia, tears creeping into her eyes. Maybe my gut feeling is my resolute, stubborn denial, a refusal to accept what's happened. And with that she burst into tears, so that Arthur took her lovingly into his arms and comforted her. He felt his conversation with Claudia tonight had really brought the two of them closer together. He discovered he was feeling very protective towards the woman he'd always found extremely attractive from afar. But in the last few days on their trip together, even with little communication between the two of them, he'd never felt more alive. In the morning they'd be taking the trek to the meadow, where Claudia's son Jack set up camp for the very last time. And then he had disappeared from the face of the earth without a single trace. Arthur privately wondered how Claudia would cope, camping in the last place where her son had gone missing. He was certain something untoward had happened to Jack on the night he sensed he was being hunted down by something that he couldn't physically see. Arthur closed his eyes. He could feel Claudia's pain. She seemed so certain that Jack was still alive, but Arthur believed she was wrong, and that her so-called motherly instincts were more a case of delusional hope than reality. What was that Pastor Amish thinking, telling a grieving mother like Claudia to listen to her gut instincts? Claudia was probably so ridden with pain, she had refused to accept the inevitability that her son was no longer in life. Arthur did not think Claudia's son had run away to start a brand new life for himself. In the diary entry, he had clearly expressed a great deal of guilt about not being there for his mother. Jack was obviously a responsible, conscientious young man, and Arthur was certain he'd never willingly abandon his mother. It was clear from his diary entries that he was glad he'd come on this trip, because he'd wanted to be alone. But again he'd also expressed an extreme vulnerability at night, when he felt rather intimidated by the dark shadows and the strange sounds. Arthur could understand that well. As to what had happened to Jack, he was convinced that answers would never be found. There were so many 411 cases out there, where people all around North America disappeared without a trace, and theories abounded as to what had happened to these people. Arthur wasn't sure that coming here on the Appalachian Trail had been the wisest thing for Claudia to do. But as far as he was concerned, being in this marvellous woman's company, even when she was in one of her most uncommunicative moods, was the best thing that had happened to him in a long time.
I'm falling for this woman hard, he thought to himself. I can't help myself. There's a soul connection between the two of us. But I'm going to have to tread very carefully, as Claudia is not in the right frame of mind to consider a relationship with me, and understandably so. She's a fractured soul at the moment that needs my whole support. After my Rosie died, I wanted nothing to do with dating or with other women, and I rather suspect that Claudia must feel the same way, he told himself. Claudia only invited me on this camping experience because I know what I'm doing and where to go. Maybe she'll never have a romantic interest in me, but I'm here to support her as a friend nevertheless. And if that's all I get from her, that's enough for me. It had been tough the following day, waking up and having breakfast. It had been a magnificent morning, and Arthur didn't really know what to say to Claudia after she had confided in him the night before. She seemed to be clammed up this morning, as she blew over the steam of her coffee that was piping hot. This is going to be a tough day for you, Claudia, I'm afraid, said Arthur. Are you sure you want to do this? Claudia stopped blowing on her coffee and looked directly at Arthur.
with a look of undisguised horror on her face. "Are you joking? I hope you are. I came all this way, Arthur, just to go camping on the spot where my son's tent was last abandoned. I'm not about to turn around now. Are you completely insane?"
I just need to be absolutely sure, Claudia, that you're doing the right thing. I'm sure going back to the spot where your son disappeared will be extremely emotional for you.
What are you talking about, Arthur? Of course it's going to be emotional for me. I wouldn't expect it otherwise. But I need to stay overnight in the very place where my son went missing. I can't explain why this is so important for me, but I need to do it.
But of course I can understand, Claudia,
said Arthur, not really sure if he did actually understand. But he knew after Rosie died, he had done things to feel close to his late wife that seemed rather unorthodox, like hanging around at the local library, where she'd once been a librarian, in the vain hope he'd feel her energy. And oddly enough, going back to the library had made him feel strangely close to his late wife. It was the place where they'd first met, when he'd first asked her to help him find a book he wanted to take out. And he'd liked her so much when he'd met her that he'd promptly asked her if she'd like to join him for a coffee sometime. He had expected Rosie to refuse his proposal, but instead she'd given him the warmest, most beautiful smile he'd ever seen, and his heart had melted like butter over warm cornbread. From that moment on, they had become inseparable. When he had visited the library, it was like that moment they had first met had come alive for him all over again, for he could almost imagine Rosie looking at him from behind the desk and saying, "How can I help you, sir?" her brown eyes twinkling with a genuine warmth. Arthur could understand that if Claudia felt camping in the very place where her son had disappeared would help her to find some peace or some closure, well, all well and good then. He couldn't help but wonder how Claudia could possibly believe that Jack was still alive. The sorry truth was that all the evidence pointed to the contrary, and in his humble opinion, Jack had disappeared in a nefarious way, judging by his ominous description of sensing he was being stalked by persons or a wild animal unknown. But being young and alone in the wilderness made you particularly vulnerable. Arthur recalled how there were times when camping solo on the Appalachian Trail that he himself had also felt distinctly uncomfortable, as if someone was watching him, and those had been harrowing times for him, when he'd experienced a cold chill running down the back of his spine, but the feeling had passed, rather like a muscular twinge you might feel in your leg for a moment, that simply just goes away. And when it disappears, you think no more about it. He rather suspected anyone camping alone might face similar personal demons. Arthur knew all too well when you were alone in the wilderness, miles away from any other human beings, you were extremely fragile, and that was the risk you had to take camping alone. But after Rosie had died, Arthur had been willing to live life on the edge. He had discovered that he rarely felt alive when he was camping in the wilderness, far away from human habitation. So when he returned to work after a stint of hiking, he felt like he could overcome almost anything, even the passing of his beloved wife Rosie. It had been something so very healing for him. The natural world had brought for him a sense of perspective back into his life, when you begin to realize how significantly small you are in the grand scheme of things, and that nature's flow is so very harmonious. After listening to Claudia reading Jack's diary entries, he had been struck with a sense that something very bad had happened to that young man, and he rather suspected Claudia would never get over her son's vanishing so mysteriously, without any answers. When something like that happens, there really is no closure, as you are always left wondering, what did happen to my teenage boy?
I appreciate everything you shared with me last night, Claudia. It must have been tough for you to read those diary entries to me. Of course, we will camp in the place where your son was last seen, or rather where he went missing. But I want you to know that if you change your mind at the very last minute, I will completely understand.
No, I need to do this. There is no changing my mind, said Claudia insistently, with a fierce determination. And so after breakfast, with backpacks on their back, They set off on their intrepid journey to retrace Jack's last movements. As Claudia walked down the paths that her son had clearly navigated only a week before, she felt sick to her stomach, overcome with the bubbles of a very bitter nausea that rose up at the back of her throat. She began to seriously regret eating that porridge for breakfast. She'd have been better off if she'd eaten nothing at all, because she felt like vomiting. She gritted her lips firmly together, telling herself to get a grip. She had felt compelled to come on this trip. It was almost as if the wilderness itself had been calling out her name. She had come all this way, and she was not going to turn back. She certainly appreciated Arthur coming on this trip with her. It had been generous of him to do this. She had discovered what a gentle soul he actually was. He had that Crocodile Dundee look about him, and his experience in camping had been invaluable for her. She honestly didn't know how she'd have done this without his expertise. He always knew exactly where they should camp, and how to prepare a fire pit. He had all the survival skills you need when camping out in the wilderness. She knew she hadn't been much company for him, for she'd barely communicated with him at all. But he hadn't seemed remotely bothered by her awkward silences, and had appeared perfectly comfortable sitting next to her around the campfire, staring up at the stars in wonderment. She was surprised how extremely comfortable she had felt with this stranger, and how she'd opened up to him so easily. She had not imagined she'd share Jack's diary entries with him, but somehow she'd felt compelled to open up. If the truth be told, it really had been good for her to let off some steam and express her feelings about Jack's mysterious disappearance. Arthur had listened to those entries in the diary with a keen, very curious interest. He was convinced that Jack had met with some kind of foul play, or had been attacked by a wild animal. It was clear that the police and everyone else who knew her story, with the exception of Pastor Amish, of course, believed that Jack was obviously dead. It would seem Arthur seemed rather angry with her pastor for filling her with hope. But Claudia believed Pastor Amish knew a thing or two about human intuition that so many other people overlooked or dismissed out of hand. He had said for her to listen to her gut, for it is the seat of knowledge within us, gifted to us by God.
If you can honestly sense your son is gone, then you must assume he is dead. But if you still feel he's alive, Claudia, then he probably is. Pray to the good Lord about it. Ask for his guidance, and hopefully you shall find the answers you so obviously seek.
Jack is alive, she told herself emphatically, as her walking boots beat down on the forest floor, where rocks deliberately punnelled their way through the ground. The earth was sprinkled with fallen leaves that looked like golden confetti. As with fall around the next corner, everything was so richly bright and colourful, so inviting. The sun that danced through the trees cast its cheerful prisms of light across the earthen paths. It was spectacular to behold. Sometimes they walked through alpine fields, past streams that chugged down windy paths. They'd take their boots off and paddle in the water. Of course the trek had been fun to a degree, as nature can be so soothing, rather like an antiseptic chamomile lotion, that you can slather all over your body, for it calms down the skin and brings a pinkness to the face. The trip had been like that. The soft breeze nuzzled against her skin, and had been like a friend to her, whispering in her ears that all would be well. The sunshine made her feel warm, as if someone was giving her a warm hug. And at night, when she sat by the fire with Arthur at her side, staring up wondrously at the Milky Way, with the stars and all their wonderful constellations, it had made her feel as snug as a child wrapped up in a warm bed.
"How are you doing?"
asked Arthur, when they stopped for a while to enjoy a cool drink and a couple of muesli bars for energy. "I suppose I'm feeling all right," said Claudia, wiping some sweat away that had gathered on her brow. "I guess the walk has been quite invigorating today. I am impressed with my son's athletic skills. It's not exactly an easy walk, is it? There's a lot of uphill trekking over here."
"I'm impressed that you're not out of breath. Most people would be so," said Arthur. "And your son obviously enjoyed a good challenge." You wouldn't find many people taking this trail, let me tell you. Well, I guess Jack was just like his father. He always enjoyed a great challenge.
It was towards the end of the day that they pitched their tents in the meadow where Jack had last camped out for the night. It was an airy feeling to set up camp in the very place where her son had gone missing. Claudia had walked around the meadow, examining every single blade of grass, and looking under every rock to see if she could find something that might tell her more about her son's mysterious disappearance. But the police had obviously thoroughly combed the area and had found nothing, and neither did she. Claudia didn't eat much over the campfire that night. Her heart was extremely heavy. Coming here had been a bad idea. What on earth had she been thinking of? Of course Jack was dead. He was never ever coming back. What a fool she'd been. "I'm sorry, Arthur, but I'm not very hungry tonight," she said, pushing away the food. "You can eat my share. I'd appreciate it if you would. I think I'm going to go to sleep."
"Are you sure you're all right, Claudia?"
asked Arthur.
"Well, I'm not exactly sure about that," said Claudia. "I'm just tired, aren't I? I suppose I need a good rest." "Claudia," said Arthur, holding her hand briefly for a second, "I'm very sorry about Jack. I know you are, Arthur, and I appreciate that," said Claudia, quickly wiping away a tear. "I think tomorrow we should probably make tracks back to your truck. We aren't going to find anything here. My son is obviously gone. I've got to come to terms with that now."
When Claudia woke up the following morning, after a somewhat sleepless night, she was surprised to see that the tent zipper had been left wide open. She wondered if Arthur had gone out for a moment, but then she discovered he was still fast asleep, sleeping in his sleeping bag. But then she noticed something out of place. There was another sleeping bag at the edge of the tent, and when she went to inspect it, she let out a shrill scream. For inside the sleeping bag, her son Jack was lying there. He was the one that woke up with a start when Claudia screamed, as did Arthur, who quickly came rushing over to Claudia's side, wondering what on earth was wrong. Both Jack and Claudia stared at Jack in complete bemusement. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. It seemed so surreal. It couldn't be true, but it really was Jack.
"Jack! It's you! Oh my God, it's you! I thought you were dead! We thought you were dead! Everybody thought you were dead!"
said Claudia, sweeping her son lovingly into her arms, and bursting into tears. She cried into his shoulders and kept hugging him over and over again.
"Oh my God, you're alive! He's alive, Arthur! He's alive!"
Jack looked completely bemused.
"Of course I'm alive, Mum. What's your problem? I'm perfectly fine. Why have you come here? Didn't I tell you I wanted to camp alone? I wanted my space. What are you doing in my tent?"
Claudia was soon to realize that her son absolutely had no memory of anything that had happened to him since he had disappeared. He had woken up in their tent, believing he was on his solo camping trip, and having no idea that he'd been missing at all, and seemed rather aggrieved that Claudia had arrived at his tent, as if she didn't trust him to camp on his own. She was naturally relieved that she had found her beloved Jack, and after the police had talked to him at great length, he was unable to explain where he'd been for all this time, for he had no memory of what had happened to him. He was well nourished and in good shape, and seemed rather bemused to realize he'd been missing at all. Claudia had been eternally grateful to Pastor Amish for making her listen to her gut instincts, for hers had been right all along, and Jack had been very much alive. 2 years went by, and Jack had shared his rather unusual story with his girlfriend about the strange experience of missing time. He had been encouraged by her to go and see a therapist so that he could be regressed to the night that he vanished to find out what on earth had actually happened to him. Jack didn't want to go into details about the regression therapy, but everything did come back to him during the session. He shared a few details of the experience with his mother. He claimed that he'd been asleep in his tent when he'd suddenly awoken to find himself suspended in the air in his sleeping bag. At the time he thought he was caught up in a crazy dream, and then he realized he was being carried off by something very large. At the time he was crying out, "Put me down! Please put me down!" But this thing, whatever it was, continued to carry him, ignoring his pleas. He claimed he was brought to a cave by this massive male Bigfoot. As to why he'd been brought into their cave, he had no answer, as the male Bigfoot seemed to want him there for reasons he couldn't explain. He lived with these Bigfoots for a while, a few days, and I'm not sure what they wanted from him. The two little Bigfoot children played with him in the cave. They played games with sticks and stones. He said they were sweet and communicated with him telepathically. The female Bigfoot was not remotely happy that the male Bigfoot had brought him to their cave to live with them. When the male wasn't around, she had told him that he didn't belong there, and when the time was right, she'd get him back to safety. She apologized for her partner, saying he was always picking up strange things and bringing them back to the cave. Jack went on to say that the female Bigfoot was both kind and extremely protective towards him, and let him cook his own meat that she brought from their hunts on the fire pit in the cave, so he never became hungry. One day she told him that the time was right. She gave the male Bigfoot something to eat, which made him fall fast asleep. Jack believed whatever it was, it contained something with sedative properties. She then told Jack that he would no longer remember what had happened to him, for she hypnotized him with her eyes, and then placed him on her back. He then woke up later in his mother's tent. He's sure the female Bigfoot intended to return him to somebody else's tent that was camping out in the Appalachian Trail. But the fact that he woke up in a sleeping bag in his mother's tent was just very fortunate. Jack didn't want anybody to know about his unusual story because it was deeply personal to him, but at no time did the Bigfoots mean him any harm. He thinks the male Bigfoot liked bringing strange things back to the cave, and on this occasion he was the object of the Bigfoot's curiosity. These days Jack is happily married and still goes on outdoor excursions, but to date he's never been abducted by a Bigfoot again. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.